switching them up.
What?
Just say we'll begin in just a moment.
We'll begin in just a minute. We'll let them finish. Oh. Oh. That's right.
Well, this committee has a lot of doctors normally.
Yeah.
We don't happen to have any here at the moment, but normally we have lots of docs. We've got a higher percentage of doctors in this committee.
All right. Good afternoon. This joint hearing of the subcommittees on disability assistance and memorial affairs and economic opportunity will now come to order. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank my colleagues, Chairman Arrington and Ranking Member Esty, and Member O'Rourke. Congressman O'Rourke will be along, Ranking Member O'Rourke will be along later, and for working together to put this hearing together. The hearing is entitled the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs Fiscal Year 2019 Budget, Veterans Benefits Administration, and the Board of Veterans Appeals. The President is asking for almost $200 billion for VA, which is an increase of about $12 billion over last year. This would be on top of the previous increase in the VA's budget. Since 2006, the VA budget has grown 175%, while overall federal spending increased 54%, and the GDP grew by only 40%. I believe that the VA must be one of our nation's top priorities. We have an obligation to ensure that the men and the women who have served our nation in uniform receive the benefits they have earned. At the same time, we also owe it to the taxpayers, some of whom are veterans themselves, to ensure that every dollar is spent wisely. After reviewing the budget, I have several questions that I want the VA to answer. For example, the budget includes a request for 605 more full-time equivalents to process the VBA appeals, but the budget does not explain whether these additional FTEs will be assigned to new appeals or in the modernized system once it's implemented, or if they will work on the appeals of veterans who have been waiting years in the existing appeals system. I'm also looking forward to the department providing more information about the board's plans to resolve its current appeals inventory, especially if the ramp take rate continues at 3%. Now, I know the VA is doing everything within its power to increase the number of veterans willing to opt in to ramp, but what if that doesn't happen despite the department's best intentions? I'm going to stop right there because we have a full agenda ahead of us, and I want to save the time for questions. Unfortunately, so you know, I have to step out early for another appointment. I want to assure you that all the witnesses that I will carefully review and the record and let you know if I need any additional information. With that, I ask unanimous consent that the written statements provided for the record be placed into the hearing record. Without objection, so ordered. Again, I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I want to call on Ranking Member Esty to give her opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for joining us here today. We're here today to focus on the administration's FY 2019 budget proposals for the Veterans Benefits Administration. Staying focused on veterans' employment, education, and compensation may admittedly be difficult with all of the other issues swirling around the VA these days. However, that is our job, and it is our job in this meeting here today. And we appreciate the Board of Veterans Appeals Chairman Mason and the VSO representatives for being here to offer their perspective and expertise. As the ranking member of the Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs Subcommittee, I want to take a moment to emphasize that the administration's proposal for a compensation COLA round down is a non-starter. As has been said many times before by members of this committee, as well as the VSOs, as well as our constituents, it is designed to take benefits from veterans receiving disability compensation to pay for other veterans programs. If caring for and compensating veterans is truly our nation's priority, then finding the necessary means to pay for it should also be a priority. I want to thank the DEMA Chairman Bost for sponsoring H.R. 1328, the American Heroes COLA Act of 2017, which authorizes the COLA for FY 2019 without a round down. And I'm happy to have joined him as an original co-sponsor. I look forward to hearing the witnesses' testimony today and to your answers to our questions. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. And I now recognize Chairman Arrington for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Esty, for your comments and your leadership, and for hosting the hearing today. Thank everybody testifying for being with us and for your input and counsel through this process, and for joining us at this hearing of the Subcommittees on Economic Opportunity and Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs as we examine VA's fiscal year 2019 budget requests, specifically as it pertains to the VBA. Chairman Bost already outlined the overall FY19 VA budget request of nearly $200 billion, which is no small amount, but I want to focus my thoughts and questions today on a piece of that is very important, and that's the programs within the VBA that are, I believe, often overlooked, but that really go a long way to empower and prepare our veterans in their everyday lives. And in some cases, I think, can save money long-term because of the ounce of preparation versus the pound of intervention down the road. If any of you have met me or attended one of our EO subcommittee hearings, you know that I believe, like all of my colleagues, that veterans and their families deserve the very best services, benefits, and care that we can provide them. But you would also note that I feel the same way about the taxpayers and making sure that they are getting their greatest return on their investment and not wasting dollars where they could be better utilized elsewhere for excellent service for the customer, which is our veteran. As I mentioned today, I'm interested in discussing certain programs within the VBA that help to transition veterans into a meaningful and productive civilian life. These are the benefits such as the GI Bill, vocational rehab, home loans, and transition services that do more than send a check every month to the veteran, but that instead empower veterans, as I said, to lead a more productive and fulfilling life after their active duty service. These benefits are estimated at $15.5 billion for fiscal year 2019, yet unfortunately, the same programs that administer these benefits are often not given the same priority and focus as other programs within the VBA, let alone the rest of the VA. And in my questions, I'll get into more details about how these programs have expanded in terms of the veteran need, or what I would call demand, and how the capacity to deliver and meet that need has been flat, and in some cases, from a resource standpoint, has declined, even in this budget. And so I want to get at, because you can argue that everything's a priority, but if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. At least that's my experience. And so you've got these programs on the VBA side that, again, if you administer them well, they will, down the road, I think, have a positive effect, not only for the individual veteran, but for the entire stakeholder group, and including the taxpayer. So I look forward to our discussion today. I thank, again, the witnesses for being with us this afternoon. I also want to thank Chairman Bost again, and Ranking Member Esty, and Ranking Member O'Rourke for his partnership and on the committee as we endeavor to serve our veterans. Chairman Bost, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Arrington. I just asked that all other members waive their opening remarks as per the committee's custom. And now I want to welcome our witnesses who join us this morning, or this afternoon, and thank you all for taking the time. You know, I was just going to go to you. Would you be ready to make your opening remarks?
In the interest of time and acknowledging my tardiness, I will waive my opening remarks.
Okay, all right. Yeah, he does.
You know, it's just like a Texan, Mr. Chairman, to make a dramatic entrance like that.
But then to yield.
Okay, well, our first witness is the Board of Veterans Appeals Chairman, the Honorable Cheryl Mason. She is accompanied by Mr. James Manker, VBA's Acting Principal Duty Undersecretary for Benefits, and Mr. Lloyd Thrower, the Deputy CIO and Benefits Account Manager for VA's Office of Information and Technology. For our VSO witnesses, first is Mr. Matthew Schuman, the Director of Legislative Division for the American Legion. Also joining us today is Mr. Shane Learman, Assistant National Legislative Director for the DAV. Finally, we are also joined by Ms. Lauren Augustine, how about that? Director of Policy for the Student Veterans of America. I want to remind all witnesses that your complete written statement will be entered into the record here today. Chairman Mason, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to present the Department of Veterans Affairs testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Bost and Arrington, ranking members Esty and O'Rourke, and distinguished members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of the President's fiscal year 2019 budget, including the fiscal year 2020 advance appropriations request. I am accompanied today by Mr. Jamie Manker, Acting Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Benefits at VBA, and Lloyd Thrower, Deputy Chief Information Officer, Account Manager for Benefits from OIT. While the unwavering support and leadership of our VA committees, Congress passed groundbreaking legislation on VA accountability, appeals, modernization, the Forever GI Bill, and personal improvements. The FY 2019 budget fulfills the President's strong commitment to all our nation's veterans by providing the resources necessary to improve the care and support our veterans earned through sacrifice and service to our country. The President's FY 2019 budget requests of $109.2 billion in FY 2019 is an increase of $1.5 billion over the FY 2018 budget advanced appropriations request and $121.3 billion in FY 2020 VBA's mandatory advanced appropriations. In addition, the budget requests a discretionary funding of $2.9 billion for VBA and $174.7 million for the Board of Veterans Appeals for claims and appeals processing. The budget request would allow VA to sustain the claims processing improvements while concurrently focusing on the Secretary's priorities to modernize VA systems and services, provide high-quality, efficient care and services, and keep up the latest technology and standards of care. For the Board, the FY 2019 request of $174.7 million is $19.2 million above the FY 2018 budget and will sustain the 1,025 full-time equivalent employees who will adjudicate and process legacy appeals while implementing the Appeals Modernization Act at the Board. VBA's FY 2019 budget request supports the disability compensation benefits programs for millions of veterans and their survivors. The budget also reflects a sustained commitment to deliver 1.3 million rating claims and 187,000 higher-level reviews and decrease the amount of times veterans are waiting for decisions. In August 2017, the President signed into law the Veterans Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act of 2017, representing the most significant statutory change to impact VA claims and appeals we have seen in a long time and provided much-needed reform. The new system, still in the implementation phase, provides a more efficient claims and appeals process for veterans. Within VBA's 2019 request is $75 million, which will be used for 605 appeals processing FTEs. Section 4 of the Modernization Act also authorizes the VA to develop programs to test assumptions relied upon in planning. Accordingly, VBA launched the RAMP, Rapid Appeals Modernization Program, in November of 2017. The initiative allows eligible participants the voluntary option to have their decisions reviewed at the higher level review or supplemental claim lane as outlined in the Act. Additionally, the Board is exploring a pilot program that will allow the Board to make predictions about timelines and productivity, test assumptions regarding appeals modernization, streamline processes in anticipation of full implementation, and find efficiencies. On August 16, 2017, the President signed into law the former GI Bill Act, which is the Harry W. Comrie Veterans Educational Assistance Act of 2017. This includes the most comprehensive change to GI Bill benefits since the enactment of the post-9/11 Veterans Educational Assistance Act in 2008. This bill provides access and availability to educational benefits for eligible veterans and fundamentally changes the way we view GI Bill. VA is also proud to be part of the Transition Assistance Program Interagency Partnership. In 2017, VA made a strategic decision to do a complete redesign of that curriculum. Since no two military to civilian transitions are the same, the redesigned curriculum is personalized to each transitioning service member. VA looks forward to continuing to work with Department of Defense and Department of Labor and all of our other partners to improve and streamline TAP. The fiduciary program requests $22 million in the FY 2019 budget for an additional 225 FTEs to protect benefits paid to some of the most vulnerable beneficiaries who, because of disease, injury, advanced age, and being below the age of 18, are unable to manage VA benefits. There has been an over a 60% increase in the active beneficiaries from the end of FY 2011 to the end of FY 2017. The requested resources will increase the capacity of VA to process approximately 16,500 additional field exams. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to address the FY19 budget. The resources will honor the President's commitment to veterans by providing the high-quality benefits our veterans have earned. The budget will support the Secretary's efforts to achieve his top priorities. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to responding to any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Mason. Mr. Schuman, please start your testimony for the American Legion, please. Thank you.
Making a promise is easy. Honoring the promises you made, particularly in the heated political climate we find ourselves in, is more difficult. Chairman Bost, Chairman Arrington, ranking members O'Rourke and Esty, and distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of Denise H. Rowan, National Commander of the American Legion, and our 2 million members, we thank you for the opportunity to present our position on President Trump's proposed fiscal year 19 budget for the Department of Veterans Affairs. The American Legion appreciates the President following through with the promises he made on the campaign trail to take care of those who have served the United States in uniform. At a time when most federal agencies are experiencing a decrease in their respective budgets, the VA will hopefully, with assistance from these 2 critical committees, receive a much-needed increase. Acknowledging my time before you is short, I will focus on a few critical topics. 2017 was a productive year for veterans legislation. There's no doubt about that, sir. One bill the American Legion championed in concert with this committee was modernizing the appeals process. Now that appeals modernization is being implemented, we need to be sure the legacy appeals, or the older appeals, are not forgotten and given the due process they deserve. The American Legion is thankful to see the increase of funding for the Board of Veterans Appeals and to maintain the current 1,000 FTEs and hire an additional 600 employees to address the appeals modernization reform and focus on the legacy appeals. Some of these claims are older than I am, and that is simply embarrassing. Shifting focus, after a veteran's claim has been adjudicated, they are often eligible for access to the Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment Program, or also known as VOC Rehab. This program provides comprehensive services and assistance enabling veterans with service-connected disabilities and employment handicaps to achieve maximum independence in daily living, become employable, and maintain suitable employment. Our concern is simple. If funding is increased to process more claims and appeals, and those claims are indeed adjudicated, it would increase the applicant pool for VOC Rehab. If funding is not increased for VOC Rehab to hire more staff and process the eligible applicants, the potential to overload the applicant pool and the program as a whole increases exponentially. Therefore, the American Legion would encourage this committee to increase funding for the VOC Rehab program, which is simply charged with helping veterans become more productive. In terms of the GI Bill, let me first thank you, Chairman Arrington, and the work that your committee has done to create and pass the Harry W. Comrie Veterans Educational Assistance Act of 2017. There is no doubt this bill will help those who have served, and the American Legion was and is thankful to be part of the largest improvement to the post-9/11 GI Bill. While reviewing the President's proposed budget, we noticed a plan to cap the cost of expensive flight training programs at institutions of higher learning. The American Legion understands and applauds the Trump administration, or why the Trump administration has chosen to include this in their budget request. However, we can only support this provision if the funds saved from implementing the caps is returned to fund other veteran programs such as the GI Bill or bettering the transition process. Lastly, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, Mr. Chairman, I sit before you today on the 99th birthday of the American Legion, meaning that for 99 years we have done exactly what I am doing today, advocating for those who have selflessly defended and served this great and beautiful nation against the evildoers of the world. I extend a sincere appreciation from our 2 million members to each of you for your dedication to veterans and the American Legion. I can honestly say that we are very much looking forward to the next 99 years. Before I end, I will quickly remark in terms of the COLA comment that you made earlier, Ranking Member Esty, and that is exactly the testimony I rendered this morning. The American Legion is absolutely opposed to that and stands with you. In closing, Chairman Arrington, Chairman Boss, Ranking Members O'Rourke and Esty, and the distinguished members of the committee, the American Legion thanks you for the opportunity to share with you this afternoon, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Schuman, and happy birthday. So, Mr. Learman, you may begin your DAV testimony.
Thank you. Messrs. Chairman, ranking members, and members of the subcommittees, on behalf of DAV, we thank you for the opportunity to present our recommendations for the fiscal year 2019 Veterans Benefits Administration and Board of Veterans Appeals budget. I would like to note our funding recommendations were developed with our partners in the independent budget, Paralyzed Veterans of America, and the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States. Our written testimony contains our complete recommendations, and today I will briefly discuss a few of those items. Overall, we recommend approximately $3.1 billion for VBA for fiscal year 2019. The administration's budget request for VBA is approximately $2.9 billion, roughly $200 million less than our recommendation. In reference to compensation service personnel, we recommend 900 additional employees for VBA, requiring an estimated $92.4 million increase. Of those additional employees, we recommend 500 to address the pending and future appeals backlog and workload, another 350 to address non-rating related work such as dependency claims, and 50 employees for the fiduciary services. By comparison, the administration's budget seeks 605 additional employees to implement the new appeals process and reduce the inventory of pending appeals. We appreciate the administration's commitment to reducing the large amount of legacy appeals. However, there is a need to address the additional staffing for non-rating related work. In reference to vocational rehabilitation and employment services, we estimate that they will need an additional 143 employees in fiscal year 2019 for a total direct workforce of 1,585 in order to achieve the 1 to 125 counselor to client ratio. Counselors manage an active caseload and provide support services to almost 150,000 participants. This addition of 143 employees would require an increase of $18 million. We are disappointed by the administration's proposal for a decrease of $250 million for voc rehab. While we understand this is partly due to lower pricing for the Transition Assistance Program, this decrease completely disregards the increased need of voc rehab services for veterans even years after they've separated from service. The administration even acknowledges that since 2013, participation in voc rehab has increased by 17%. However, staffing levels have remained stagnant. In reference to the Board of Veterans Appeals, we do not recommend any additional staffing for fiscal year 2019. However, it is critical that the board complete the hiring and training of new personnel for 2018. With the full implementation of the Appeals Modernization Act expected in February 2019, it'll be critical for VA and Congress to carefully and regularly monitor workloads, timeliness, quality, and other metrics to ensure that the board is and remains properly staffed in the future. Within the administration's proposed budget, there are several legislative proposals that we find troubling, as they could have significant negative impacts for veterans and their families. First, we oppose the rounding down of veterans' COLAs for 10 years. This proposal would reduce veterans' benefits by $3.1 billion over a 10-year period, and reducing veterans' earned benefits for the sake of budgetary savings is not consistent with this nation's sacred obligation to care for veterans and their families, and DAV adamantly opposes this proposal. Second, we object to the proposal that seeks to narrow the Agent Orange presumptives by redefining herbicide agents and stating they were only used in Vietnam. Currently, herbicide agents are defined as those containing dioxins, specific acids, and any other chemical compound currently found in herbicides. We strongly oppose this proposal to limit disability benefits based on this narrowing of the definition of herbicide agents. Third, we oppose the proposal to intentionally increase the evidentiary threshold before the VA is required to order a compensation and pension examination. And finally, we object to the proposal to eliminate compensation payments to survivors and the estates of deceased Namer class members for Agent Orange presumptive diseases. Mr. Chairman, we thank you for the opportunity this afternoon, and this concludes my testimony. I would be pleased to answer any questions you or any members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lehrman. Ms. Augustine, you are now recognized for the Student Veterans of America.
Thank you. Chairman, ranking members, and members of the subcommittees, thank you for inviting Student Veterans of America to provide testimony on the Department of Veterans Affairs fiscal year 2019 budget submission. We will discuss our general concerns with the current budgetary process, concerns specific to the Forever GI Bill implementation, and vocational rehabilitation and employment (VR&E) budget requests, and suggestions to strengthen how VA supports student veterans. Concerns with the lack of regular order around the budget process are consistent talking points within the veteran advocacy community. Nevertheless, the need for predictable government funding is worth reiterating. Even with VA's robust advance appropriation funding cycle, the step and repeat of continuing resolutions and looming threats of government shutdowns leave student veterans with questions and uncertainty. The recently passed Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 is an appreciated first step towards resolving that uncertainty, and as the next iteration of funding requirements comes due in the immediate days, we hope to see continued compromise. As the budget process does continue, we highly encourage sufficient support and appropriations for readjustment benefits largely comprised of economic opportunity programs within the VA budget. VA's budget request calls for an estimated $15.5 billion in readjustment benefit obligations in 2019 and $16.1 billion in obligations for 2020. This does not include the discretionary funding requests necessary to administer these benefits. While making up only a portion of the VA budget, these programs are still substantial, with billions in annual appropriations. More importantly, economic opportunity programs should be thought of as an integral part of the empowering whole health model of care VA prioritizes. Programs encompassed under the economic opportunity umbrella, like the GI Bill and home loan guarantees, are proven success stories. Specifically looking at the GI Bill, last year, SVA released the National Veteran Education Success Tracker, INVEST for short, in partnership with VA. The first of its kind, it studied 854,000 individual records, every post-9/11 GI Bill user from 2009 until the summer of 2015. The INVEST report outlines the many ways student veterans outperform their peers on campus, from higher grade point averages, a higher success rate, and a propensity to obtain degrees in high-demand fields. The data makes clear student veterans are worth the investment America is making in them. With that proven success, and through increased access to and participation in these benefits, budget obligations continue to increase. We again encourage the subcommittees to think of such programs as an integral part of the whole of VA when advocating for appropriated funds. A large demand on the VA's budget related to economic opportunity programs stems from implementation requirements for the Forever GI Bill. As the leader of a coalition of over 60 organizations that helped see Forever GI Bill become law, SVA commends VA and its dedicated staff for the ongoing public outreach effort to make those affected aware and to clear dedication to successfully implementing the new law. However, as detailed in VA's budget request, VA needs sufficient resources appropriated to fully implement the Forever GI Bill. Specifically, while we appreciated the authorized IT funds to help implementation, these funds have yet to be appropriated. We encourage the inclusion of such appropriations as soon as possible, given the decreasing implementation window. Additionally, SVA encourages including sufficient appropriations to meet VA's expected staffing needs to address increased oversight and usage expectations. A second major program within VA's readjustment benefits is the VR&E program. We believe it is necessary to meet the current appropriations need VA outlined in its budget request. However, Congress should also address some of the underlying resource issues and proactively improve the VR&E program. For example, given the highly individualized nature of the program, there is a strong need to ensure proper counselor-to-veteran ratios as mandated in Public Law 114-223, which requires one full-time employment equivalent for every 125 veterans. We encourage these subcommittees to hold VA accountable to that ratio in their budget request. SVA is a solution-oriented organization, and we appreciate the willingness to collaboratively address our concerns alongside the members of these subcommittees. Our concerns with the VA budget request have one common denominator. At present, VA's current enterprise structure is lacking a formal leadership role for economic opportunity programs. To address that, SVA strongly supports the creation of a new administration within VA, the Veteran Economic Opportunity Administration, which would include undersecretary-level representation for programs supporting economic opportunities and transitions of veterans and their families. We feel this new administration would be a refocusing of existing resources that modernizes VA and creates greater accountability for economic opportunity and transition programs. SVA's detailed support for this new administration will be the focus of upcoming testimony on pending legislation. We thank the chairman, ranking members, and the subcommittee members for your time, attention, and devotion to the cause of veterans in higher education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Augustine, and I'm going to begin the questions. Chairman Mason, your testimony indicates that the board is exploring a pilot program as an extension of RAMP to help expedite certain legacy appeals prior to the full implementation of the appeals reforms. Can you please describe why you feel that the pilot program will provide useful information if it is scheduled to begin in October of 2018 when the reform is expected to go live on February 2019, less than 4 months later?
Certainly, Chairman. The board is working with Digital Service and OIT and our program management team from OEI in VA to look very closely at what we can do within a pilot program to address concerns from both GAO and this committee about timeliness and productivity, as well as be able to test how those veterans are going to choose the lanes they're going to choose. And if we can do so in October of 2018, beginning of FY19, we'll be able to pivot very quickly with our partners to impact any changes we need before February of 2019.
Yeah, that's a pretty quick pivot. So also, and if you can, just as brief as you can, but if Congress increases the board's budget at the president's request, how long will it take to address the 155,000 appeals currently pending for, at the board?
We're working on a timeline on that. As you know, we do start implementation of, plan to start implementation of the appeals modernization in February of 19, if not before, with the pilot. That means we're going to be running both the direct, both all 5 dockets at the board. So we will need to balance the legacy cases as well as the 365 lane, which we will be working those veterans cases through as quickly as possible. To date, in 2018, the board has completed 34,300 decisions for veterans, which is a record number for us.
Okay, according to the president's budget, the VA projects that the board will issue 81,000 BVA decisions this year. Even if this occurs, how is the board planning to address its current appeals inventory, given the VA projects that the board will receive more than 90,000 appeals during that same time period?
Mr. Chairman, we are on track right now. In fact, we're running ahead. We're running a little bit over 100% for delivery of that 81,000, so I expect to exceed that 81,000 decisions this year for FY18. As far as going into FY19, we are continuing to streamline our processes and re-engineer things, including the new interactive decision tool that we're piloting right now with the board to speed up decision writing time. I'm also exploring case review options for our attorneys, which would allow quicker case review time to allow attorneys to get to the decisions quicker, to result in quicker decisions out the door. So those things, in addition with the technology increase that Digital Service is giving us, which is ongoing, are the ways we're going to deliver those results.
Like, I don't see it that you're not breaking even with the numbers the way that look, and I'm hoping you can. I really do. Let me move on. Mr. Manger, I'm going to ask you a question that I asked the full committee hearing. Ask you in full committee hearing, but hopefully you'll get a better response because I kind of caught off guard, I think. Then the FY 2019 budget request and an additional 605 full-time equivalents for FTE.
Yes.
that would dedicate to the VBA appeals. Will the VA assign these employees to process legacy appeals or process appeals under the new system?
So the way we will assign the new 605 FTE that we are getting in our appeals lane is to use just as many as we need to achieve our 125 days for those that opt into or file an appeal after February of next year. So any additional FTE will be used to work legacy appeals. Additionally, as you look at our production thus far, in January of 2017, we stood up an appeals management office, and we took all the FTE that were allotted for appeals, and we focused them solely on appeals. Since we've done that, we've increased production in the appeals lane by 24%. With the opt-in, we're hoping that we can get many of the appeals, the legacy appeals, to opt into the new process. That's that ramp process we talked about.
Okay, so what you're saying is it'll be both?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Both, okay. Well, I hope, because we would like to see this move as fast as possible. I am out of time, and I will recognize Ranking Member Esty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you all for your hard work and your testimony before us here today. I wanted to start, there are a lot of places we could start, but with Mr. Learman, you had mentioned concerns about the Agent Orange exposure. As you may know, I and others on this committee have been vigorously seeking attention with the current veterans who are suffering from burn pit and other toxic exposures. It's an issue of great concern for us, so certainly your comments stood out to me. Can you amplify a little bit what you think this means for both current veterans who may have appeals in the system, but also what it may mean as we are facing this whole new round of veterans who are actively asking us to take action before this becomes a 30-year wait for a new generation of the equivalent of Agent Orange, if you would, please.
Yes, thank you. The way it's being proposed in the budget is they want to redefine Agent Orange or herbicide, specifically only those toxins that have TCDD. They also want to say that only those toxins cause any of the presumptive disabilities, and they also want to say that that toxin was only used in Vietnam and nowhere else. So by narrowing that scope and redefining, that means that any veteran who has a disability related to herbicide exposure outside of Vietnam, such as on the Korean DMZ or Blue Water Navy, or even in Thailand, would no longer be able to claim that because of the redefinition down. We disagree with that, as I noted, because the current statute doesn't define it that way. It defines it as toxins, acids, and chemical compounds found, and we think it should stay that way so it doesn't affect any current veterans receiving benefits and any pending appeals as well.
Thank you, and I know I hear from the Blue Water veterans in my district all the time, as well as people who served in Laos, Cambodia, and who had exposure in other places where we, in theory, were not actually engaged in activities. Mr. Schuman, if you, as we're trying to figure out if we're going to be on track for all of the new appeals, we've spent a lot of time, the VSO worked very hard to help us on the modernization. Do you have access to the materials and to VA leadership as the rollout is happening to give feedback? And we enjoy it and we need it here, but as well, do you have access to VA leadership and materials from them about how this is being processed, how this is being received, and so that we can roll it out in the best way possible and have RAMP actually be successful?
Well, thank you for the question, ma'am, and the answer is yes. The American Legion, I think, is meeting with Ms. Mason rather often. She's probably tired, as we are, of some of our colleagues, Lucelli in particular. But yeah, absolutely, we meet with them frequently and get the necessary information we need in our engaging conversations to make sure that the program works to its best.
What are you finding about outreach? That's obviously a concern. That is indeed much of what you as VSOs do is help provide that outreach. What are you hearing so far? What do we need to know about the VA's efforts itself, how the VSOs fit into that, and what, if any, additional guidance or resources might be needed from this committee to assist in this process?
Well, thank you for that question as well. I think that is one area that always can be better improved is communicating to the veteran community, particularly for the hundreds of thousands of claims that are currently in process, trying to figure out and make sure that they are educated to make the best decision whether they need to move over to the new system or not. I know we work particularly closely with VA to share that with our members, and I'm sure my colleagues here at the table do the same as well. I'd be happy to answer that a little bit more in depth after discussing that with my team and to figure out where they are and what we're exactly hearing from our members.
Thank you, because I do think that that's very important. As if we're going to be successful in this, we need to be learning what best practices are, which may differ in different areas. And I just wanted to underscore again our concern, which you're going to hear from everyone here, about the legacy appeals. It is very important to move these new appeals forward, but in fairness to the World War II and Korea veterans in my district who have been waiting a very long time, I think we all owe it to them to make sure that those legacy appeals don't just disappear.
You're right. They deserve it, ma'am.
They deserve it. And again, I want to thank everyone for their efforts. But our veterans served us. We need to ensure that we are effectively serving them. Thank you. And I yield back.
I want to thank the ranking member. I'll now take 5 minutes for questions, and I will start, Madam Chairman, with you and your team. Again, thanks for being here. And please feel free to defer to your colleagues if you think they can better answer the question. Is the vocational rehab program working?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Banker on that question.
All right, let me back up. What's the defined success for the vocational rehab program?
So success for the voc rehab program is completing, getting a veteran to where they are employable or can live a independent life is my.
Okay, so that's education, training, employment, it's all the above in
Yes.
terms of services.
That's right.
Okay, how's it going? Is it working? Are we helping our veterans, and are they achieving those desired outcomes?
So from our perspective, I believe so.
What's your perspective? Is that something that you just feel in your gut? Or do you have a scorecard? Do you have a survey? Do you have a...
So we measure voc rehab as successful outcomes. I apologize for not having that information.
That's okay. I didn't
in front of me.
warn you about this, but part of it is I need to do an oversight hearing. We do on the voc
Absolutely.
rehab. We've done it on every other program.
That's right.
And I don't like to I'm on the budget committee, and this business of giving money and talking about money and how we'll invest money wisely without having a review, oversight, and reauthorization drives me crazy. So I just want to get some top-line feedback from you.
Absolutely.
Do you have the numbers, and do they demonstrate that this voc rehab is serving the customer, our veterans,
So I
our
believe that-
disabled veterans?
What I'd like to do is have Mr. Jack Kammerer, who is our director for voc rehab, come back in and talk to you about that. But I'd like to address.
Do you have a sense that it's working, though, that in terms of the numbers, you think they're there? If the committee gets those numbers, will they be positive? Will they show a successful program?
Again, from my perspective, yes. We've looked at the program, and there are some veterans that were in the program for a long time that have basically gone dormant, if you will, have kind of opted out, not working in the program. And we have...
Let me just, and I don't mean to be rude, but
Sure.
do you think it's an important program?
I absolutely think it's important.
I want everybody that comes to the table to talk about money to know about the program's effectiveness.
Sure.
And if it does work, and if it is effective, and there is a need, then why are we not giving it the time and attention and resources the other programs are getting? Because like I said before in my opening remarks, there's been an increase in demand by 12%, but they've cut the program $257 million. I recognize that we don't have, even though we act like that we have all the money that we could print, that's not true. Someone will pay the piper one day, probably our kids or grandkids, but nevertheless, it's about prioritization. Is this a priority? Is it working? Why are we cutting the money?
So I'm not certain where you're getting the 257.
It's in my notes, and if it's wrong, then I can accept that too. So we've talked about flat line in terms of the staffing, and then what I've got here is that the staffing has been requested flat at 1442 for the last 3 years.
That's correct.
And that the proposed budget includes a $257 million decrease in funds for VR&E. If that's not true, that's fine, we can move on.
Right, I'm looking at the delta between 18 and 19 of being 59 million, and that's consists of almost entirely the contract efficiencies that we experience in the TAP program.
Okay, I'm going to come back to this, but let me pivot to another question in the remaining seconds that I have. If this is working, if it is important, if it is a priority, then my question is, why have we had the VBA undersecretary or the undersecretary for benefits vacant since 2015? Yikes. Yeah, nobody wants to take that. I don't want to take that question.
I would love to see an undersecretary for benefits.
So let's, and look, I mean, I support this president 100%. I think he's doing most of the right things, but I got to say, we need the political leadership. I served in George W. Bush administration, and if you don't have the political leadership, and I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat, those guys play a very important role in oversight and accountability and driving down the policies that we are passing that we expect to be done. So I'm really concerned. My time has expired, and I don't want to take advantage of the chair here. But I'm going to come back to this issue because we just had a recent resignation as the Deputy Undersecretary for Economic Opportunity. I've heard my colleagues on the other side of the aisle beat this drum, and I haven't chimed in because I'm not sure I agree with all the freeze, because we need to find savings, efficiencies. We need to do things that everybody in the country does in their families and their businesses. But this gives me great pause in terms of the commitment.
Just really quickly, there is a USB nominee currently.
Okay.
The hearing scheduled for April the 11th.
Okay, so it's been vacant a while now, 3 years, but you've got somebody in the queue. Okay, my time is way expired, and I promise you I will give you guys all the time you need. My ranking member from the great state of Texas. You bet. Mr. Tucano, I yield 5 minutes to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was happy to see that that close to the requested $30 million for Forever GI Bill IT implementation is in the budget. Do you feel that the implementation is proceeding on track, and that the funds will be the funds that will be required to fully implement the bill are available?
Okay. Thank you for the question. I would say that right now that the implementation is going quite well. I will, as context, would like to make sure that you understand that we are implementing. The timing of this was interesting because we began implementing the statute was passed at the same time we were already in the midst of a very substantial overhaul of education systems with the work to retire the benefits delivery network. So we're balancing the issue of trying to build a plane while you're flying it is kind of interesting in dealing with that. So we've had a very strong partnership with Education Services to identify those specific pieces of the bill that we need to get in place through systems very quickly in order to make sure that all the benefits that are in the statute are implemented properly. We identified those sections 501 and 107, as well as correcting a lot of, or making a lot of changes to the letters that go out to veterans so that they understand the forever part of the Forever GI Bill. We're implementing those, and we're very much on track of having these aspects on board as needed. We are, at the same time, we're proceeding.
Okay, mindful of my time, I just want to make sure we get other folks to be able to weigh in on the implementation, so thank you. Okay. Anybody else want to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, sir, for the question. I'd like to weigh in on that question. As was stated in our testimony, we appreciate the VA's robust outreach efforts as it relates to Forever GI Bill implementation and their dedication in the budget request to address their implementation needs. We have been impressed with their ability, their willingness to have stakeholder engagement on the implementation process. I would like to request that the VA be as robust in their public outreach efforts moving forward. And I'd also be remiss if I did not again request that the appropriations necessary to fully implement the bill, specifically the IT needs, were appropriated quickly. Most of the provisions go into effect this August, and that window is quickly decreasing. So the appropriated funds are necessary now. I also would like to recommend the VA include in their outreach efforts knowledge of why changes are being made, specifically as it relates to the BAH payments. So a delineated information about monthly payments that they're receiving through e-benefits or some sort of notification would be very helpful in helping veterans understand why things are changing, why benefits they're seeing might be fluctuating. Thank you.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Well, good. Regarding the VA, the GI Bill, this is a question to the VA. Do you have any data on how many veterans have applied for GI Bill restoration and have their funds being restored?
So we've notified over 8,000 veterans that were affected, and thus far we've restored over 300 entitlements.
And do you have a dollar figure for what that would be?
Sir, I'm sorry, I don't have that.
It would be great if I could get that dollar figure, and
Absolutely.
that would be greatly appreciated. I am extremely disappointed that we're seeing in the higher ed bill a complete elimination of the 90-10 rule. There's no guardrails at all. The Department of Education's the regulatory process is going full speed ahead to give the Inspector General's own report in the Department of Ed is fearful of what these regulatory rollbacks are going to do in terms of increasing the for-profit predatory behaviors in the for-profit higher ed sector. And I'm very fearful about what this will mean for liability to taxpayers going forward, especially because these schools target our veterans. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Takano. Now I yield 5 minutes to my ranking member from the great state of Texas, Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd love to begin with a question for Mr. Manker, only because we all just received testimony from the Gold Star wives, Gold Star families yesterday, survivors of those who were killed serving this country, and just had the chance to meet with a few of the Gold Star wives in my office just now. And I want to bring up two issues which you may or may not have an answer for, but I at least want to make sure they're registered with you and that we get to follow up with you and get a precise answer. One surviving spouse told me how every year she receives a form in the mail that she has to fill out and certify that she has not remarried. And she said, as simple as this sounds, there is a shock to the system every year when we receive this. Is there some way to just, if in the case that you do remarry, you can send something affirmatively to the VA? I'm not exactly sure who handles it. You may not have an answer. I'd love for you to get back to me on that one.
Certainly.
And I shared with them that I was going to see you and I would raise that.
Okay.
The other, more generally speaking, for Gold Star families, what, if anything, does the Office of Survivor Assistance need in terms of additional resources or authorities that you do not have already? Again, if you don't have an answer, let me know, and we'll come back to you on it.
Absolutely. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. And then for the VSOs, Mr. Schuman, really appreciate your comments on vocational rehab. I feel like a number of us have addressed that. The chairman's asked some good questions. For DAV and Mr. Lyerman on the toxic exposure. I was struck by how many of the VSOs, from VFW to VVA to IVA, raise this issue. And we absolutely have to get it right for all the reasons that you described. And the more narrowly we define exposure, the fewer people we're going to be able to help, the more are going to die without treatment or care from the government that put them in harm's way in the first place. So I just thought your comments were wonderful, and I think they hit home with all of us. And Ms. Augustine, you and SVA have just been terrific in working with Chairman Arrington and me and the Committee on Economic Opportunity on Forever GI Bill and other issues involving integration after service. Love your question about IT. Just in a sentence or two, were you satisfied with the answer that you received from VBA?
Yes, and we look forward to continuing to work with them. Thank you.
Great. You also mentioned an Office of Veteran Economic Opportunity. And without getting into the wisdom of whether we move that around, in the big picture, where are you missing, where does SVA think we're missing urgency on economic opportunity issues? I know that our chairman is doing a wonderful job on this. He's convened a number of roundtables with which that you all have participated in. Where are you missing either resources or urgency or attention from the VA side of the house right now?
Thank you for that question. As the chairman himself said, there is generally less attention given to economic opportunity programs, and we feel that is because it's currently underneath VBA, and VBA is primarily focused, as they should be, on disability compensation, as that is the bulk of their budget. However, economic opportunity programs are a proactive, empowering part of the VA's mission that can address many of the problems and issues facing VHA and VBA farther down the road, which we think validates the need for its own administration. It also would allow greater accountability for the subcommittee, who does a wonderful job bringing attention to the programs and benefits within economic opportunity. It would allow greater accountability for you all to have somebody sitting here to ask these questions and make sure you're getting somebody you can hold accountable to those answers.
Yeah, and just on those three issues, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Ranking Member, I think if you all could be our guides on this issue and help to hold the VA as well as the committee accountable for follow through and delivery. I know the chairman's really big on accountability and being able to measure, and I like that, and I want to make sure that as we implement, for example, the Forever GI bills, we work on toxic exposure and vocational rehab, that you all help us in terms of giving us the feedback on how effective we've been as a government on these issues. You're doing that today, but just please continue to do that. We need the help. So thank you for your testimony.
Congressman, I'll
yeah,
agree with
please.
you real quick, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. I'll echo the sentiments from Ms. Augustine. Adding a fourth administration is critical in making sure that you have somebody truly to hold accountable. You'll hear next week that the VA and others are opposed to this idea. Really having somebody to sit before you, as long as we can fill that position, and holding them truly accountable to get real answers and the data that you want, is supported by the American Legion.
Well, and until we do, and it sounds like there's a lot of wisdom in that, and we want to make sure, or I want to make sure we do the due diligence here, the full argument on all sides. I really think we need more hearings like this with the VBA present and informed, maybe a little more, I think over time, and maybe some of the questions already that we've asked for the record and we get responses to, we begin to build a record of commitment or a record where there are some gaps that need to be filled. So just know that I think this committee is focused on that. We'll follow your lead. And then perhaps at some point there is somebody specific to hold accountable just for these issues within the administration. So I don't think that's a bad idea. I think when you have that single point of accountability, you're likely to get better results. So thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I want to thank the ranking member for his remarks, and now yield 5 minutes to my colleague from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Manker, as you know, the VA disability compensation system is the single largest line item in the VA's budget. Over 4 million veterans annually receive disability compensation, and the expenditures to those with disability ratings are growing at an unprecedented rate. When this committee met with Secretary Shulkin last month, there was a brief discussion on reducing compensation costs through treatment, specifically regarding sleep apnea. Can you elaborate on this?
So the Secretary, I'll try to echo what he said at the last hearing. To the extent that medical treatments have advanced, the need to compensate for the loss of income earning potential from a disability, we believe, may have changed. So as we look at the VA schedule for rating disability, we want to look at it with this new set of eyes for taking all medical advances into account is really what he was saying. Much more effectively than I just said it just now. But
So you think that by his statement that this would also apply to acne, fever, gout, sinus infections, laryngitis, and other treatable disabilities?
So, sir, we're in the throes as we speak of looking at every body system that's covered by the VA schedule of rating disability and looking at every component of that schedule to ensure that we're compensating properly.
Okay. I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and I will now yield 5 more minutes, or as much time as she needs, to the ranking member, Ms. Esty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick points to follow up on. I think this really important discussion about voc rehab. We've talked about it before, but I think it's important to talk about it in terms of the budget and priorities, and really, Ms. Augustine, you kind of underscored some of that as well. We have an incentive structure right now which calls upon our veterans and pushes them to prove how disabled they are in order to get support. And then we turn around, and in theory, we're trying to re-able them or able them, right? And so I think your point about that's an inconsistent message and mission to some extent to have it within the same division. And I think this is, in fact, my colleague, Mr. O'Rourke, I think is exactly right. We should be looking at this a little more closely and thinking about whether separating the location of those two functions in different parts of the VA might help in clarifying. But it is a problem because our point should be to enable our veterans. And we all need to do a better job on that. And it is not inconsistent to say we are going to give you all the help and support we can, and then we're going to get you as abled as you can be. So my second question, actually, for you, Mr. And is it Thrower or Thrower? Thrower, okay, wanted to make sure we're getting that right. Mr. Thrower, it's come to my attention that the Blind Veterans Association is extremely concerned that and particularly as we rely more and more on websites, the websites are not compliant for those who are visually impaired. We have laws in this country that apply to all government agencies, and if you think about our blind or visually impaired veterans, who are increasingly being urged, all of them, to go onto websites, can you tell us, what efforts are being undertaken to facilitate blind and seeing disabled, sight disabled veterans from being able to access the websites as is required by law?
Well, thank you for the question. Not one I had expected, but I will say that we have a very robust 508 compliance regimen series of law. We have a 508 office that reviews all websites as they're launched. That is part of the ATO, the authority to operate sort of process that we go through. I do not have any specific statistics on where we stand in terms of potentially enabling things that have been out there a long time, but I do know that it is a very serious matter within OINT in terms of making sure that we are compliant with all 508 standards.
Well, then we may follow up with the testimony that's been shared with us that is finding it not. In fact, you make up compliance by the people who are designing it, but if the end users, the veterans we're here to serve, are not able to access, we have a problem, right? Whether it's a legal problem or a functional problem, that is one we need to address. So I hope we can follow up with you and see if it may meet the technical definition, but again, if at the end of the day, visually disabled veterans are not able to access the site, then, the law is not doing its job and we are not doing its job. Mr. Schuman, you were nodding your head yes. Anybody have experience or can shed some light on this issue?
I don't have particular experience, Ranking Member, but I will agree with you. If it doesn't matter if it's law, if they're not being able to use it, that truly matters. So we stand again with you. We're doing a lot of standing today with you to make sure that that all veterans, regardless of disabilities, are able to access the information at VA. You brought up a point that just struck me, and I was just agreeing with you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
I completely agree with you as well.
Sure. So let's take a look at it. And the final thing on the VOC rehab, I can just tell you those ratios make a difference. It's supposed to be 125 to 1 on the counselors. I know in my district, we do a lot of outreach. We have wonderful VSOs. A lot of them serve on my advisory committee. We hear all the time how they can't get in to see somebody from VOC rehab. And you have people waiting, and we do outreach, and then they can't get an appointment. And that is the last thing in the world we want to be doing. So let us know if that is a resource question. We need to know that, or we're not doing our job. We offer this promise, and then we don't, in fact, make it possible for our veterans. So again, thank you for your efforts, and I suspect we're going to have yet more good work to do together. Thank you. Now yield back.
I want to thank the gentlelady from Connecticut and our ranking member, Ms. Esty, for her line of questions. And then I'm going to now yield 5 minutes or as much time as I might consume, which could be a lot of time. I'm not going to turn the clock because I've got a lot of questions. But I will respect the fact that you guys are busy, and again, I do appreciate y'all being here. And I'm not trying to beat up on anybody. I feel like I always end up in that place where I'm, beating up on somebody, Mr. Manker. But what's the plan? Let's just speak plainly and directly. How are you going to compensate for the increase in caseload, casework among the VOC rehab folks?
Sure. One of the things we're looking at, we've got a pilot at a couple of ROs where we're taking the administrative burden that the VOC rehab counselors face in filling out the paperwork, making sure that the equipment that our VOC rehab participants need to rehabilitate themselves, make sure they have that. We have looked at contracting the administrative portion of that out so the counselors can actually focus on that which we've hired them for, which is to be a counselor.
And you believe that will compensate for the 12% increase in caseload for these?
Certainly it will help.
I'll tell you that I'm not satisfied with the visibility and the knowledge and of the efficacy of the program and the sort of workload and how we're going to meet the new demand. Sure. It's not crisp enough for me. When I hear it, I don't get a sense that you're trying to throw everything you can at it to try to meet the need, but it's not strategic. Sure. And it doesn't seem like it's being prioritized. I'm looking at an org chart. This is where you would be here as the acting deputy undersecretary.
Yes.
And that's a lot of work. That's a lot of program and people to oversee. And one side is compensation and pension, and on the other side is field operation, and then right here in the middle is the VOC rehab and other EO programs. How much time approximately do you think you spend overseeing each of those three legs of the stool here?
So how much time?
Approximately how much time do you provide in oversight and management of the compensation and benefits?
Sure.
And then the field operation and then EO in the middle? I mean,
I don't know if I can answer that directly. What I can tell you is I have directors assigned over each one of those activities that commit all of their time to ensuring that the undersecretary's vision and my vision are actually implemented.
And the director he resigned recently?
That was the under Deputy Undersecretary for Economic Opportunity actually did not resign, he retired.
He retired?
Yes.
But it's a vacant position?
It is a vacant
Okay.
position. Right now,
And-
it's being occupied by our Deputy Undersecretary for Benefits
Do you
Assistance.
find continuity a challenge for you in terms of managing for excellence and performance to serve the customer? Do you find the continuity of leadership or the lack thereof a challenge for you?
So all of our Deputy Undersecretary positions and many of our director positions have been in those positions for years. So,
What about the political leadership?
well, the political leadership, I believe on April 11th, we'll have a new political, so.
Okay. You're a manager. Well, I won't go down, I think I've exhausted my union speech. I think I'm not going to wear out
And I like to
necessity
consider
on it.
myself a leader also.
What's that?
I said I like to consider myself a leader also.
Let me shift gears a little bit on the IT component, because we've had several hearings where IT has been a challenge. I know that even in this voc rehab component of EO, there were 11,000 VR&E participants who were delayed in receiving their subsistence allowance checks, and that it didn't appear there was much of an effort to notify them and reconcile the situation. So are you aware of that? Has that been resolved, and is that IT issue a deeper issue? Can somebody speak to that?
Sure. So I can speak to, so as a CFO, the way a pay file is processed is generally it occurs before the 28th of the month. In this case, the voc rehab file, if you will, started to process, but as soon as it hit the 28th, it stopped processing. There should have been some communication that occurred, and I take that as this has never occurred before. We were slow to respond. We were communicating at the local level, and we should have done more outreach and communication at the national level. So we now have a plan with respect to voc rehab, or we're building a plan anyways, that should this occur again, which I don't believe it will, but should it occur again, that we will be a little more aggressive in the way that we respond.
Is that an organizational management problem, or is that a IT systems problem?
I'll say that it is actually, there were obviously two components to this issue. There was a system file that did not run properly. And oddly enough, ironically, it did not run properly because we were putting in a patch to make it run faster and better at the same time. It was a very unusual circumstance. The recovery was actually within 2 business days, things were fixed and done and processed properly.
My notes say that the participants, after 5 days, still hadn't been contacted. It could be wrong.
So the problem was that it occurred during the last 2 days, and on the last 2 days of the month, no processing can go through the system.
Sure.
So it was all a timing thing. If we'd done the patch in the middle of the month as opposed to the end of
Okay.
the month, that would have been one thing. Communication, again, I take that as one that we should have done.
Okay, and I accept that, and I don't want to nitpick you. I guess the real question is, because I've seen fundamental IT problems where we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on updating legacy systems where we could take something off the shelf, or we've customized where we should have taken off the shelf, or vice versa, and we're just spinning our wheels and spending a bunch of taxpayer money and to little avail. And IT can make us more efficient and effective if we get it right. Are there IT root causes in the EO area, especially focused on vocational rehab in this instance? Are there some root IT issues there?
say that-
Or is it just a blip on the screen because of a patch that you should have da-da-da-da-da?
I will say that in this particular instance, this was a blip. that has caused us to actually look at similar processes across the board to make sure this doesn't happen not only here, but anywhere else. But at the same time, there are some substantial underlying things that we're looking to address. We are in an environment where we do have a lot of legacy systems that do hold us back from being as agile as we would like to be. Things like, as I mentioned earlier, the effort to retire the benefits delivery network that is in the education space will be a major milestone in terms of modernizing and updating our systems so that we are more flexible and more agile. We have a challenge in that a vast majority of our budget is spent on operations and maintenance, and we're really trying to work to change that equation. So yes.
Well, I appreciate your candor. You said substantial, gets my attention, and waste, you didn't use that word, to be fair, but money spent on operation and maintenance, it's not necessary to spend if we could get the right system in place. And then it begs the question again, are we giving enough time and attention and resources to this area? Because it seems that when you've got $12 billion new dollars flowing into the VA, and we've had billions upon billions every year, and yet this relatively small but incredibly important component of getting people in a place where they can be self-sufficient and productive and fulfilled in their lives and contributing again, that just seems that it's kind of like the TAPS program. I mean, we spend so much to make these guys and gals warriors of the best kind and class in the world, and then we spend a fraction to assimilate or reassimilate and prepare them for civilian life. But I get that feeling altogether, really, on the voc rehab and all these EO programs. I just get a sense they're not. And then when I ask about it, and no offense, because you got a big portfolio, but I'm not so sure that's too big. I'm going back now to Miss Augustine and her comment about, let me ask the other folks and be fair to get them involved here, but Mr. Schuman, and would you comment on, do you sense that there's a priority there? And again, I'm not trying to pick on anybody. Is it a priority? Is it a resource issue? Is it an organizational structure issue? Is it a management issue? Is it all the above? I'd like for you and your VSO counterparts to comment and expound on that.
Well, thank you, Chairman. And I'm going to go exactly back to a comment that I made earlier. I think this is a great idea of why creating a fourth administration, what you're able to do is put an undersecretary at the head of this that would work with these fine people to be able to spend and focus and give the focus that is necessary. I think that will aid this process going forward, and it will just be better.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Lehrman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I am a successful outcome of the voc rehab program.
That's great.
I personally went through the program myself almost 20 years ago, and I have the career I have now because of the time and attention I received from my voc rehab counselor.
That's awesome.
But to address the current issue, over the last 20 years, I've been helping and assisting other disabled veterans get into these programs to get access to benefits. And when you look at the current, or at least the last 6 years, there has not been an increase in any of the staffing in voc rehab for about the last 6 years. And so I think there is a serious resource issue. We can't expect the increase of participants to continue to go up and not increase the number of counselors to provide that service. We have more positive outcomes.
Are you getting the feedback that there are bottlenecks in the system as a result, or are we just making that leap based on the numbers that we have of the increase in demand? That is, maybe they have the capacity, maybe they were had more capacity and they can absorb this. I don't know, but my colleague has communicated to me and everyone here that she's starting to see that in her area, her district, her region of the country. Are you seeing it in other places?
Yes, I think there's pockets, Mr. Chairman, where there are certain VA regional offices that have the resources available, and there are others that might be overtaxed, and so you have one counselor dealing, because the current rolling average is 136 participants per counselor, and the requirement's 125. So if you take that average over 50 VA regional offices around the country, or 60, that means there are going to be some that are completely overtasked, and there's going to be others that are handling the workload very well. So I think there may be a bottleneck, and I really think it is a resource issue because it hasn't been addressed by any administration for the last 6 years.
Ms. Augustine, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, as I've spoken to already, we are strongly supportive of a fourth administration. In fact, it's one of our top policy priorities for 2018. Because of the reasons you've outlined, there isn't sufficient leadership there to be accountable to and a champion for these programs, and we view it as a vital step forward to making sure these proactive, empowering programs get the attention that they deserve and the attention that the American taxpayer has invested into it. The only thing I would like to add, which I think addresses some of the concerns you have both raised, our legal fellow Cassie has started compiling concerns that she has received from our student veterans specific to VOC rehab, and we'd be happy to set up a time to brief you both on those concerns that she's received.
Thank you very much for that kind offer, and thank you, sir, for sharing your personal story of benefiting from that service, which is a great anecdote for all of us. I'm going to close out here, I promise, but I think you could add political leadership, oversight, accountability, and the enhanced management and attention over areas like this that I think need it in a budget-neutral way. I don't think you have to spend more money to do that. We've got $12 billion. It's about prioritization. I haven't been doing this long enough to say definitively that we need to do it, which is why I'm asking you all. That my hunch is we do. I've heard the administration is not interested, but that is secondhand. So have y'all communicated with the administration and the leadership of the VA, and what have you received in the way of a response?
Yes, we have communicated that a need for Veteran Economic Opportunity Administration is a priority of ours with the administration, and specifically leaders within VA, and we have received some valid concerns from them that we look forward to hearing in next week's testimony, which includes draft legislation on this very topic.
Okay. Well, I look forward to that discussion, a more focused but robust discussion about that. I think we need to have it. I would like for the administration to buy into that. I'm not big on telling management how to manage. I'm into holding management accountable for the lack thereof and for the lack of the desired outcomes, which is hard to come by even these days, as I talked about with my colleague. I won't ask you all to tell me where, if we did increase this money, the resources, where you would find an offset within the VA. This is, by the way, I'm not attributing this to my colleague. This is all on me. But I won't make you do that, because I don't know that I've heard anybody come to this table with suggestions on where to cut things that aren't working for savings that could be reinvested in areas that we all believe are priorities, and we see living proof right in front of us, except for my friend Mr. Schuman, who did say we could save some on that flight program by capping and redirecting. So that'll be for round two one day when you guys come back here. But I want everybody at the VA to know, as long as I'm chairman of the Economic Opportunity Subcommittee, I want to know what success is for any program. I want to know if we're achieving that success, and I want to know where we need to make additional investment and where we can make additional efficiencies and therefore savings, either to give back to the taxpayer or to reinvest in areas that are working and to serve our customer. Ms. Esty has been very patient to hang in there with me, and you guys have too. Thank you for indulging me with all these. We care about this, and we want to get it right. We know you guys do too, so let's work to improve the service to our heroes and to our taxpayers. So with that, I ask unanimous consent that all members have This is really hard to read to my colleague. 5, that sounds like, it looks like 4. 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks. Hearing no objection, so ordered.